In this video, I'm going to talk about the curve for the geometry regents and how your exam is scored. So essentially, when you take the exam, the number of questions that you get right and the number of points that they're worth is converted into a raw score. So your raw score is calculated. You never end up seeing your raw score. Teachers, the people that score your exam, take your raw score and they plug it into these charts, which is essentially the curve of the exam. And depending on what raw score you get, you will receive a scaled score. And this is the score that goes on your transcript, that your teachers see, that you see, and this is the score that determines if you pass or fail the class. And so in order to pass this class, you need to get a 65 or higher on the regents. Okay, so you need a scaled score of 65 plus. Let's go through a scenario. So on this exam, there are 24 multiple choice questions in part 1, and each one of those questions are worth 2 points. So you can get a maximum of 48 points, or a raw score of 48 if you get all of the questions in part 1 correct. Part 2 is then the short response section, and you can get there's 7 questions there, and you get 2 points per every question you get right. Now, because this is the short response section, you can get partial credit if you made a calculation mistake or if you got like half the question right. So the maximum amount of partial credit you can get for a question on part 2 is 1 point. Okay, so it's better than the multiple choice section because at least you can get some credit back. With multiple choice, there's no partial credit whatsoever. Here there are partial credit or partial points. Part 3 has 3 questions, and those 3 questions are all worth 4 points. And the maximum amount of partial credit you can get on part 3 is 3 points. Okay? The lowest amount of partial credit you can get is 1 point. So 1, 2, and 3 points you can score. If you get the full question right, you get all 4 credits or all 4 points. And again, there's a total of 12 points that you can get from that section. Finally, part 4 has just 1 question. That 1 question is worth 6 points, so you get 6 points in total for completing that section. And so, again, the most partial credit you can get on part 4 is 5 points. Okay, so in total, there's 35 questions, and those 35 questions generate 80 points for you to score. Right, 80 is the max raw score. Great. So let's say that you took this test, and let's say that you got 10. In part 1, you got 10 questions right and 14 questions wrong. Okay, then let's say you took part 2. You continue taking the test. You did part 2 and you got 3 questions right, and then you got 4 questions wrong. And then let's say that you took part 3 and you got 1 question right and 3 questions wrong. Or sorry, one question right in part 3, and then you got 2 questions wrong. And let's say in part 4, you got none of it right. Okay, so you got 1 question wrong. Now, because of partial credit, let's say that instead of getting, even though you got the question wrong, let's say that you were awarded 3 extra points, right? So you got 3 points in partial credit on part 4. Let's say that after the teachers graded your exam, they realized, oh, okay, we can give him like 3 points of partial credit on part 3, and let's say they got 1 partial credit on part 2. Okay, so once your exam is graded, here's what happens. The Regents doesn't care about the number of questions you get wrong. So they completely ignore the fact that you get these questions wrong. Getting a question wrong on the Regents you don't get penalized for that. You don't get points taken off from you just because you got something wrong. The only thing that contributes to your raw score is the number of questions that you get right. So what happens automatically is those 10 multiple choice questions that you got right get converted into 20 raw points, right? 20 points that go to your raw score. Okay, because each one of those questions is worth 2 points. Then in part 2, you got 3 questions right, so that's 2 points per question, and then you got 1 point in partial credit, so that gets converted into 7 points for your score. Then in part 3, you got 1 question right, which is worth 4 points, and then you got 3 partial credit, so that turns into another 7 points added to your score. And then finally, in part 4, you got 3 points worth of credit, so that's a raw score of 3. Now, your scores per each section are then added up. Okay, so they do 20 plus 7 plus 7 plus 3. And so what does that get us? 20 plus 7 plus 7 plus 3 is 37. So this is now your raw score that you got on this Regents exam. Now, if we look at it, you got 37 points out of a total of 80, right? So 37 over 80 is about a 46% on this exam. Okay. Now, does that mean that does that mean that you failed? No. What actually ends up happening is the graders then take your raw score and they plug it into the curve or the conversion chart for that year. So this raw score of 37 is not what you get. Instead, they plug it into this chart. And let's say that you took this exam in January of 2026. So that year, a raw score of 37 would have gotten you a 66, and you would have ended up passing this test, okay? Even though you only got 46% of it right, okay? So, the curve would have saved you in this case. Remember that in this year, the lowest score that you could get to pass is a 36. So you got 1 point, sorry, the lowest score you can get this year, not in the year 2026, January 2026 is what I mean, would have been a 35. So you were 2 points above the passing score. Great, good for you. If you took this exam in, August, okay, then your score of a 37 would have ended up giving you a 67 on this exam. So you would have gotten a tiny bit better, okay? And then in this year, you would have needed 34 points in order to get the passing score. And then if you took this exam in June of 2025, getting a score of 37 would have gotten you a 66, okay? And then in this year, you would have needed, that year, June 2025, you would have needed to get a 35 raw score to pass, okay? So notice how these conversion charts are kind of standardized, right? You need within the same ballpark of points in order to get a passing score. Now, a common misconception is that these curves are dependent on how students do on the exam. That is entirely wrong. It doesn't matter if everyone passes the exam, doesn't matter if everyone fails, okay? These conversion charts are calculated before anyone even takes the exam. Don't believe me? This is what the Regents has to say about it. These curves are the result of a bunch of teachers coming together and rating the difficulty of the test. So they rate each question on a scale, on like a difficulty scale of like 1 to 10, and then they take the average difficulty of the test and they're like, okay, well, if the test is more difficult, this is the amount of points you need to pass, all right? So that's it. These curves are the result not of students, but of teachers just deciding, okay, well, this test had, this exam had 15 difficult questions, 13 medium questions, and so as a result, we'll put the passing score at 34 points. That's all. Okay, so everyone praying, I hope everyone does good. I hope everyone does bad, so that my score does, so that the curve is really good for me. Your prayers are getting unanswered, right? Because the curve is already there. If you guys are curious to see the curve for this year, June 2026, what you could do right after you take your exam is you can go to this website. So you can just Google Geometry Regents OSA, and you can click the first link, and this contains all of the geometry exams for previous years. If you go ahead and hit January 2026, you can see the conversion chart is right here, PDF version. Now, when you take this exam, you'll see June 2026, you'll be able to see the test, and you'll be able to access the conversion chart as well. So if you're ever curious, what did I need to do to pass? Well, you can check it just like that. So here I just want to predict what I think the passing scores are going to be for this test. So I think that in order for you to pass, in order for you to get a scaled score of 65, you're going to need a score anywhere between a 34 to 36. Okay, anywhere between this ballpark and you're good. If you're curious on what percent that is, that calculates down to about a 42%. So you need to get 42 to 45% of the total points on this exam in order to pass. Okay. Again, the scaled score is the only thing that's reported. It's the only thing that really matters. That's going to determine if you're passing or not. Now, for those of you that are going for mastery, you need to score an 85 or higher. And so, given the previous years, in order for you to get an 85 or higher on this exam and score mastery, you need to do better than a 67. Right? For the last three exams, you've needed to score 67 points in order to get an 85. Okay, so that translates to, if you look at the points, 83% of the exam correct in order to get mastery. For those of you that want above a 90, in the past you've needed around 73 to 72 points in order to get above a 90 on this exam. Okay, so that's pretty much, you need to get around a 90, close to a 90. The curve doesn't really help students that are doing well, right? So when it comes to getting a scaled score above a 90, you kind of just have to get a 90% of the test correct. But for students that are struggling with geometry, you need to score something much lower than an 85 in order to get an 85, and much, much lower than a 65% to get a 65 scaled score. Okay, so that's how the scores are converted. I hope you guys learned something. Good luck studying. I hope you have a nice day.